Vasily Kryukov returned 10 years after his own funeral. The town fell silent. His wife fainted right there on the porch. His son was already 15 and did not recognize his father. But the most frightening thing turned out to be something else. Vasily was still 38. No wrinkles. No gray hair. No trace of miner's disease. 3 days later, Lydia noticed one more detail. At night, a faint green glow showed through on Vasily's chest, as if phosphorus were smoldering beneath his skin. The doctors took scans and were baffled. The lungs of a miner with 20 years of experience were clean, pink, without a single speck of coal dust. The blood tests did not match any familiar pattern either. The chief physician asked everyone to keep quiet, and a week later, men in gray arrived in town, without insignia, carrying IDs no one had ever seen before. It all began in 2007. Mine number 17 near Vorkuta was considered one of the deepest in the north. More than a kilometer down, they mined anthracite there. Hard, dense, almost like metal to the touch. On April 23rd, the second shift went into the face. 6 men, all experienced, all locals. At 2:40 p.m. the first jolt came. Not a sound, but a blow to the bones. The foreman shouted for evacuation. The men bolted for the exit. 15 seconds later, the roof collapsed. Kryukov was walking last and did not make it. The lights went out. The passage was blocked. They searched for him for 8 days. Drilled bypass shafts. Lowered instruments. Listened to the rock. Nothing. The rescuers said it plainly. There would have been enough air down there for 2 days at most. The family received a death certificate. An empty coffin was lowered into the cemetery ground. That had happened more than once in mining towns. Then the mine lasted another 3 years, and was shut down. Officially, the seam was exhausted. Unofficially, strange things began. People heard a rhythmic hum from the depths, as if someone were breathing underground. 2 crews quit in a single month. By the way, if stories like this interest you, subscribe to the channel. Here we examine the strangest and darkest cases without unnecessary noise. In April 2017, Kryukov simply walked out of the industrial zone and headed home. He was wearing the same coveralls, the same helmet. Everything was clean, as if he had changed 5 minutes earlier. At home he spoke calmly, too calmly. He said that after the collapse he had found himself in a stone dead end. Then the wall behind him lit up green. The rock was warm and damp. Then the stone split open by itself, as if it had been opened from the inside. Behind the wall was a narrow passage. It was covered with a soft fibrous substance. Farther on was a cave with a strange green light. The light came from enormous mushrooms. They were growing right on the walls and vaults. Vasily drank water from a crack in the rock and lived on that alone for several days. Then hunger forced him to try a mushroom. The taste was earthy, slightly sweet. But the worst was still ahead. On the 6th day he went deeper and emerged into a vast chamber. There it was no longer dozens but thousands of mushrooms glowing. In the center stood a column. Not stone, not metal. Smooth, dark with green veins. They pulsed as if alive. The surface was warm, and to the touch it resembled skin. On the other side of the column he saw a round hollow. Inside was a thick dark liquid with a green sheen. It was from that moment that the story ceased to be merely an account of surviving beneath a cave-in. It became something entirely different. Kryukov touched the liquid, and immediately understood that he had made a mistake. It was warm, almost hot. The smell of mushrooms suddenly became sharp and heavy. His palm was burned, though there was no pain. He wiped his hand on his coveralls, and almost ran out of the chamber. Fear came instantly. Not fear of death. Worse, the fear born of a clear sense that a human being did not belong here. That this place had not been made for people. He returned to the first cave, and sat for a long time by the wall with his eyes closed. When he looked at his palm, the skin had already changed. It had darkened, become denser, and beneath it thin green lines had appeared, bright, almost glowing. A day later the marks disappeared, but it was no longer only his appearance that had changed. Kryukov began to understand the light, not to see it in a new way, but to understand it. The bright glow of the mushrooms meant movement in the depths. The dim glow meant stillness. This knowledge did not come through words. It was simply there inside him, as if someone had inserted a Chujoy signal into his mind. In the 3rd week he went down into the great chamber again, and this time he was not alone. 3 beings were following him, about 1.60 meters tall, thin gray-skinned, with a greenish tint, hairless, with completely black eyes without pupils. They moved so quietly it was as if they were not walking, but gliding over the stone. Kryukov was not afraid. Inside him there was already a certainty that they were not enemies. They approached the column, stood around it for a while and left down a distant passage. Kryukov moved after them. The descent lasted a very long time. The passages grew wider, and there were more and more mushrooms all around. Some stretched upward like columns. Others covered the walls in a solid carpet. By the way, if details like these interest you, subscribe to the channel. Here we break down the strangest and most powerful stories. Then the passage led him into an underground city. There was no other word for it. An enormous cavern, a high vault, mushrooms everywhere, and their light was almost like daylight. On the floor stood rounded black structures with green veins. They seemed to pulse. Kryukov counted no fewer than 24. Between them moved dozens of the same creatures. They were silent, gathering something from the mushrooms and carrying it inside. And then one of the creatures approached him and held out its hand. Kryukov touched it and immediately received an answer. Not in words, in images. These creatures had lived here for a very long time, even before the mines and cities on the surface. The mushrooms fed them. The liquid from the column changed the body, gave strength, and prolonged life for hundreds of years. Kryukov stayed with them for 10 years. He ate mushrooms, drank water from cracks, and once a month took that very liquid. His lungs stopped hurting. The miner's cough disappeared. Old scars faded. Wrinkles did not appear. He remained the same 38-year-old man. Only new green lines slowly spread across his skin. The creatures watched him calmly, as if he were a rare experiment. He no longer thought about returning. Up above they considered him dead. But one day a dull udar came from above. Then another. Someone was drilling through the rock. All the creatures raised their heads at once. Kryukov understood too. The time had come. They silently surrounded him and handed him 2 bundles. In one lay 3 black stones with green veins. In the other was a thin metal plate with alien signs. Not letters. Not numbers. Something far more ancient. He saw that pattern again, and again he could not look at it. Kryukov turned away and quickly wrapped the plate in cloth. The creatures stepped back in silence. Then they showed him the way up. The ascent dragged on agonizingly long. 1 kilometer. 2. 3. The passages grew narrower and narrower. The light dimmed with every turn. At last he emerged into that very first cave where he had spent the first days after the collapse. The mushrooms were still growing, but there were fewer of them now. Their light had weakened too. Ahead waited the old cave-in, the very one that had cut off his path 10 years earlier. But now there was a hole in the pile of stone. Narrow, about 1 meter in diameter. Light was breaking through from above. Not green, ordinary. White. Daylight. Kryukov stepped closer and looked up. There was the sky, gray overcast with clouds, but his own. Familiar. He squeezed through the opening and climbed to the surface. Around him lay the industrial zone of the old mine. Concrete blocks, rusted pipes, abandoned mine carts. Not a soul. In 10 years the place had almost died. Grass had grown through the asphalt. The paint had peeled away. The windows had been smashed by wind and time. Kryukov walked toward the city, slowly, cautiously. Everything seemed familiar and alien at once. New signs, different cars, unfamiliar faces. People looked at him with alarm. Before them walked a man in a dirty coverall and helmet, as if he had just come out of a mine that had been closed 10 years ago. When he reached the house, Lydia opened the door and immediately fainted. Then there was the hospital, and after that the real interrogation began. The police, investigators, doctors, everyone asked the same thing. Where had he been? How had he survived? Why had he returned only now? Kryukov told the truth. About the collapse. About the caves. About the mushrooms. About the creatures. They did not believe him. The investigator declared that these were hallucinations after long isolation. The doctors took everything they could. Blood, saliva, skin. They did scans and x-rays. A week later, the chief physician called him into his office and locked the door. He spoke quietly, as if he was afraid even of the walls. The results turned out to be impossible. The lungs were clean, completely, not a trace of coal dust, no scars, no old damage. That simply does not happen to a miner who worked underground for years. The blood had changed too. They found cells in it that resembled red blood cells, but larger and denser. And worst of all, they glowed faintly green. The skin had changed as well. The upper layer had become thicker. The cells lay in even rows, almost like bricks in masonry. The doctor did not know what this was protecting against, but he understood the main thing. Something had happened to Kryukov that modern medicine could not explain. He asked him to keep quiet, said he would send the test to Moscow, to an institute. Otherwise, bad questions would begin. At home, things only got worse. Ordinary food no longer suited him. Soup, meat, potatoes all seemed like dead matter. His stomach accepted it with difficulty. His body seemed to reject human food. Kryukov kept silent, because it was impossible to explain something like that. At night he looked at himself in the mirror and understood even more. His face had barely changed in 10 years, and beneath the skin of his chest stretched thin green lines, barely noticeable in the light, but in the dark they shone. Then Kryukov admitted a terrible thought for the first time. He had returned not quite human. Soon they called from the Medical Research Institute. They invited him to a meeting. 3 people were waiting for him in the office: a scientist, a stern woman in a white coat, and a young man who hardly spoke. They listened to his story and asked him to show everything he had brought from underground. Kryukov handed over the stones, not the plate. He said he had forgotten it at home. They told him to bring it the next day. He did not bring it. On the contrary, he hid the plate under a floorboard in the shed. He himself did not know why. He simply felt that this thing could not be given away. By the way, if you are interested in such grim and strange stories, subscribe to the channel. Here we break down plots in which the most frightening thing hides in the details. A few days later, the changes accelerated. Kryukov almost stopped sleeping. Then he stopped completely. Food made him nauseous. The sun irritated him. He was drawn to a different light, to the soft green glow he remembered from the depths. Anton began avoiding his father. Lydia also felt that beside her was no longer the man she had waited for 10 years. And then one night the plate under the floor began to knock. Kryukov took it from its hiding place, and saw that the symbols were glowing. More than that, they were moving, slowly, alive. It hurt to look at them, but he could not look away. That same night he had a dream for the first time in a long while. Or not a dream. He was standing underground again, in a huge hall. There were creatures all around. Many, no fewer than 50. One of them approached and held out a hand. Kryukov touched it, and immediately heard the message. Not in words, in images. Return, your body is changing. Up above you will die. Here you will live. By morning there were even more glowing lines on his chest. His whole skin seemed to be sprouting a green network. Anton saw his father in the kitchen, and asked him directly whether he had become different. Kryukov found no answer, and the boy quietly said that his mother cried at night, and whispered the same phrase. You did not come back alone. Soon they came for him again, this time without unnecessary talk. Instead of a hospital, they took him to a gray building on the outskirts. Inside it was not a ward, but more like a sealed laboratory. White walls, tile, instruments, syringes, a couch under a bright lamp. They told him to lie down. They drew blood, and immediately understood everything. It was almost black with a green tint, and in the light it glowed faintly. The woman from the administration entered the room, looked at the test tube, and ordered them to take more, much more. Kryukov lost almost a liter of blood, but he did not weaken. No dizziness, no fainting, as if his body was already living by different rules. After that they began questioning him again about the creatures. How many there were, how they communicated, what they had done to him underground. When he repeated his story, the woman coldly said that it was impossible. At such a depth there could be no life, no light, no conditions, no chance. Kryukov looked at her, and answered simply, I was there. I saw it. The woman stood up first. She did not argue, and did not reassure him. She said harshly and very clearly, we will take the stones. We will check everything. If there are traces of organic matter inside, if substances connected with bioluminescence are found, then your story is real. If not, then it is delirium after trauma. That happens. Kryukov sat more quietly, but he asked directly, and if I did not make it up? The woman looked him in the eyes and answered without pause. Then something is hidden beneath Vorkuta that science did not know about, and that changes everything. History, biology, the very understanding of life. It could become the discovery of the century, or it could become a threat. Everything depends on those who live below." Then she left. Igor and the man in the jacket remained in the room. They were silent for a long time, an hour, then another hour. Kryukov asked for water. Igor brought a glass. Kryukov drank, but it did not get easier. The thirst did not go away. He was drawn to different water, to the kind stored in stone, cold, heavy, with the taste of raw earth. By evening they drove him home. Igor said they would take the stones for analysis in the morning. Kryukov did not argue. The stones were no longer the main thing. He had hidden the main thing earlier. The plate lay in the shed, under a floorboard, and no one knew about it. At home, Lydia met him in tears. She had called hospitals and found no trace of him anywhere. Kryukov embraced her and said that everything was fine. Just checks. Just tests. But Lydia did not believe him. She saw the main thing. He had grown gaunt, turned pale, become chuzhim. Kryukov said nothing in reply and went to the bedroom. The moment he closed his eyes, the vision returned. The underground city, glowing mushrooms, a circle of creatures, and one voice directly in his head. "There is little time. Your body will not endure up above. Return now, otherwise it will be too late." He woke with a start. The darkness of the room seemed flat and dead. Outside the window were street lights, houses, rare cars, the ordinary human world, but Kryukov already felt that he no longer belonged to it. That night he left quietly. He did not wake either his wife or his son. He got dressed, took a flashlight, went out into the yard, opened the shed and took the plate from its hiding place. It was warm, almost hot, and it pulsed under his jacket like a living creature. He walked through the empty town and reached the old mine in the industrial zone. The gates had long since been welded shut, but there was still a breach in the fence. Kryukov squeezed inside and found the very hole through which he had once escaped. He looked down, dark, deep, about 10 meters to the first cave. He climbed down slowly, clinging to ledges, and felt almost no fear, only a strange anticipation. His body seemed to recognize the road home. Below, the mushrooms glowed more weakly than before. As if the underground world had been waiting for him, Kryukov went deeper, along the same passages he had already walked before. The air grew heavier, the walls wetter, and time lost its meaning. Only one thing remained important, to reach it. And when he came out into the great hall, it became clear that they really had been waiting for him. The creatures stood there, not one or two, more than 100, all silent. In the center came forward the one who had given him the plate before. Kryukov held it out back to him. The symbols on the surface flared up and began to move. Then the plate was placed on a stone, and the other creatures stood around it, and the hall came alive. The light of the mushrooms moved in waves. The plate trembled. The signs tore themselves from the surface and rose into the air. They formed a map, not just a diagram of one cave, but a gigantic network of underground passages, hundreds of kilometers beneath the tundra, beneath the mountains. Far to the west, Kryukov saw caves, halls, columns filled with liquid, mushroom fields, and new settlements. This was not a secret group. It was an entire civilization. By the way, if you are interested in such hidden plot details, subscribe to the channel. Here we carefully break down the strongest and strangest stories. The creature spoke in his head again. "Now you know. There are many of us. We exist not only here. We are older than humans. We were here before you and will remain after." Kryukov asked why they had shown him all this. The answer was simple and terrible. Because he was no longer entirely human. His body had changed. Up above it would perish. Here it could live for a long time. Maybe a very long time. The word sounded clear. Hybrid. The first successful transition between two worlds. Neither human nor underground creature, but something in between. A 10-year experiment. All that time his body had been slowly rebuilding itself after the mine, the food, the water, and the environment of the underground world. The hardest blow came later. When Kryukov asked about his family, the creature answered almost mercilessly. They had already said goodbye. Your wife is not crying over what you became. She is crying for the man she loved. That man died back there in the mine. Those words cut deeper than any knife, but there was a truth in them he could no longer escape. He did not understand it at once. At first it seemed that only the body was changing. Skin, eyes, strength, endurance. But the worst was happening deeper down. His memory stayed with him, but his feelings were slipping away. Kryukov remembered Lydia, Anton, the house, the streets of Vorkuta. He remembered everything down to the smallest detail. But those memories had become Tsujimi, like an old photograph from someone else's album. The faces were familiar, the places too, but the warmth was gone. That was the first time he clearly realized he was losing his humanity. Not outwardly, inside. On the 29th cycle he went back up to the surface again. He promised to return in a month. He needed to find out what the tests had shown. And most of all, whether the scientists had believed him. He emerged at night. The city was asleep. The streetlights glowed dimly. Empty streets drowned in gray light. Kryukov moved quickly and kept to the shadows. His appearance now frightened anyone who saw him. Gray skin, bald head, black eyes. He made it to that same hangar and called Igor. Igor did not answer right away. Only after a long series of rings. His voice was tired and strained. Igor said only this: "Come. Same address. 1 in the morning. Alone." Kryukov arrived early and hid behind a rusted tank. At midnight a car pulled up. Then Igor went inside. Alone. Kryukov waited a few more minutes and only then entered. Igor flinched when he saw him up close. But there was no time left for fear. The results, he said, had come from several laboratories. First from the city lab. Then from Moscow. Then from a closed institute. And all the conclusions matched. The stones Kryukov had brought did not resemble any known rock. Their composition turned out to be layered and anomalous. The samples contained elements that do not exist in the periodic table. Under a special light they glowed and gave off faint heat. Their age could not be determined. Either millions of years old, or not of earthly origin at all. With the fungi it was even more disturbing. The analysis showed an entirely different biology. There was deoxyribonucleic acid there, but not a double helix, a triple one, with additional links that do not occur in Earth organisms. These fungi could affect human cells, slow aging, accelerate tissue repair. In theory, they could extend life 2- or 3-fold. And the liquid baffled everyone completely. They found organic matter in it, minerals, proteins, amino acids. But the main thing was not its composition. Under the microscope, the liquid behaved like a living system. Its microstructures moved, linked together, and formed a network resembling primitive nervous tissue. Kryukov asked only one thing. So they believed me. Igor gave a bitter smile. They did. But not the ones we needed. Instead of a scientific team, the military arrived. A general, colonels, special forces, everything was classified. The samples were confiscated. Talking was forbidden under threat of prison. An operation was already being prepared. 15 men, weapons, communications, medics, geologists. Descent through his mine. A route straight to the creatures. Kryukov understood at once how it would end. The military would see unknown beings and open fire. And if the underground dwellers started defending themselves, everyone would die. Igor admitted he had tried to explain. He said the creatures were intelligent and not hostile. No one listened. For the military it was simple. Until an object proves it is safe, it is the enemy. When Kryukov learned the operation was scheduled for the following evening, he left at once. Already at the door, Igor warned him they would detain him by force. But Kryukov threw back only one word. They'll try. He vanished into the darkness, and Igor stayed behind and immediately called someone. Quietly, quickly. He betrayed him. Kryukov did not go back. He raced. The hybrid's strength was working at its limit. In a matter of minutes he reached the mine and went down. A short time later he was already standing in the great hall. They were all waiting for him there. More than 100 creatures. They already sensed the danger. Through touch, Kryukov passed on the essential thing. People are coming. Tomorrow. Many. With weapons. But their answer stunned him. They already knew. They had heard the digging above. They had only been waiting for him. The chief creature said that now the decision was his. Stop the humans or let them in. And then it revealed one more truth. If there was no choice left, the colony would defend itself. Their ancient columns could release a heavy gas. It would fill the passages, and the humans would fall asleep forever. Kryukov understood the full horror of it. If the military descended, they would die, and then new units would come from above. More of them, harsher, with explosives and machinery. They would bring down the caves and destroy everything. That meant there was only one path. Not battle, negotiation. By morning he had made up his mind. He went up to the city and no longer hid. In broad daylight, in full view of everyone, he walked to the administration building and went straight into the general's office. There he told everything. About the collapse. About 10 years underground. About the creatures. About their intelligence and peaceful way of life. The general listened, but did not fully believe him. He demanded proof. Bring one of them here in 2 days. Otherwise the operation begins as planned. Kryukov returned below and passed on the condition. After a long council, the colony agreed. A young representative volunteered to go up. Kryukov called him Svetly. For 2 days they prepared. Svetly grew used to the cold, the dry air, the weak daylight. Kryukov showed him images of the city, cars, crowds, houses. He explained how people lived and what they feared. On the 3rd day they went up. Svetly saw the gray sky, rusted pipes, and empty yards, and quietly said that there was too little life above, only stone and metal. Together they walked to the administration building and entered the office. The general, colonel, scientists, and observers were already waiting there. Svetly could not speak with words. He communicated through touch. One of the scientists gathered his courage and held out a hand. A minute later he recoiled, his face white. He had seen their world, the caves, the columns, the fungi, the memory of a people who had lived underground far longer than humans. A second scientist confirmed the same thing. The creatures are intelligent. They have culture, knowledge, and their own form of development. But that was not enough for the general. He did not need discoveries. He needed control. How many are there? Where are they? How dangerous are they? The scientist said it plainly. They are not aggressive, but they will defend themselves. And that was enough for the general to draw his conclusion. He stood and announced the decision. The creature will remain here, under observation. Society split almost at once. Some saw salvation, others saw a threat. For thousands of families, that liquid became a last chance. For doctors, it became a scientific revolution. And for politicians and security officials, it quickly turned into a new source of fear and a struggle for control. One question became especially sharp. Where is the line between healing and changing a human being? If a dying person receives life, but along with it their body changes, can that be called a price or violence? The arguments were everywhere. In hospitals, in universities, in parliament, in the kitchens of ordinary apartments. Kryukov found himself at the very center of this storm. To some he was a hero, to others, a dangerous intermediary. He was invited to closed meetings, scientific forums, and television broadcasts. Again and again he explained one simple idea. No one should receive the liquid in secret. No one should have it forced on them. Only voluntary choice. Only full information about the consequences. At the same time, tension was also growing underground. The creatures saw how people were reaching for their gift with increasing insistence. They remembered the general's fear. They remembered the attempted seizure. And they did not believe that the greed of the surface had vanished forever. But the most dangerous crack did not open in society. It opened between the allies. Some of the scientists wanted to move slowly and honestly. Others were already thinking about patents, classified developments, and military contracts. If the liquid cures cancer, slows aging, and accelerates regeneration, the temptation is too great, too much money, too much power. Kryukov understood this before the others. He had already seen what fear leads to. Now he saw what hope leads to when mixed with profit. And it became clear that peace between the two worlds does not rest on discoveries. It rests on trust. Lose it once, and the underground people will retreat into the depths again. Perhaps forever. The hybrid changes themselves also turned out to be no small matter. In humans, healing improved. Fatigue decreased. Perception of darkness and space changed. Some began to tolerate cold and lack of air better. Scientists cautiously suggested that the body was adapting to the environment in which the creatures themselves had once emerged. This opened incredible possibilities for medicine, mining, and even space programs. But along with that, a new fear was born. Would a human still remain human? And here the story reached the point after which there was no road back. Kryukov could no longer be just a guide or a witness. He became living proof that two species could not only coexist, but also change one another. His own life turned into an argument and a target. He understood the main thing. The conflict was no longer about a single mine, a single general or a single colony. It was now about the future of an entire civilization, about whether humanity could accept another intelligence without trying to subjugate it, and whether the creatures could share their knowledge without fearing that their own gift would be turned against them. So what lay ahead was not an ending, but the hardest stage: to create rules, to protect the right to choose, not to let fear defeat hope, and not to let hope turn into a new form of violence. It was on this thin edge that the fate of both worlds had to be decided. The arguments did not die down. For some, the liquid became a symbol of progress. For others, it meant the end of humanity. Kryukov kept repeating the same thing. It is a choice. If you want to remain as you are, don't drink it. If you want to change, drink it. But society had already split apart. Politicians turned the issue into a weapon. Some demanded a ban. Others promised to open access to everyone. Rallies, fights, and panic began. By that point, 10 years had passed since his return from the mine. Kryukov thought more and more often that he had brought to the surface not only knowledge, but a new enmity. He had revealed a secret hidden for millennia, but he had not made people calmer. One day he descended into the colony and told the creatures that he was leaving forever. He wanted to hide deeper down, where there were no humans. The chief creature stopped him. It said simply, "You are the bridge. If you disappear, the connection will be broken. People will be afraid again. The military will return. Everything will collapse." Kryukov admitted that he was tired. 20 years underground, another 10 between two worlds. He was no longer human, but not a creature either. And then they offered him not an escape, but something greater: to create a third world. Not human and not underground in the old sense. Hybrid. A space where two civilizations live side by side and learn from each other. By the way, if you're interested in twists like this, here we explore stories where science fiction speaks about the future more accurately than many forecasts. Kryukov returned to the surface, gathered scientists and supporters, and proposed building the first hybrid city underground. The authorities gave permission. 2 years later, construction began. Humans dug tunnels, installed ventilation and lighting. The creatures cultivated fungi and living supports. The first to arrive were hundreds of volunteers: scientists, engineers, doctors, the sick, and simply those who were tired of the old world. Then the creatures descended as well. First 10, then 20, then 50. 5 years later, the city was alive. About 1,000 humans and 100 creatures shared one space. There were conflicts, there were mistakes, but a new culture was being born. Later, the first people who wanted to become hybrids came to Kryukov as well. One after another. He understood the main thing. He was no longer alone. There were becoming more bridges, which meant the third world was no longer an idea. It had begun.